Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy, and I'm a corporate sellout who likes to think of herself actually as a corporate innovator. I think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck, even though it often does. By some statistics, up to 80% of the workforce are really unsatisfied, disengaged at work. On the flip side of this, the paradox is that people kind of expect to get their meaning and purpose and create their identity, form that around their roles at work. And with the pandemic and the Great Resignation, this has all forced us to take a look at the quality of life within work and what culture really means. I do want to say that I think business is cool. I think that building things and solving real world problems, which is what most businesses set out to do, all of this is based on the human ability to create and to evolve and to manifest. These are all fundamental to the best parts of the human experience. I want to say a couple of things about this recording. I speak with Kathy Vines, who is a career coach. Currently, for about 9 years, she's been in this role. But prior to that, about 20 years of HR corporate experience behind that to back up what she's talking about. We talk about so much. This episode is just so rich and fantastic. We talk about her trajectory and how it was actually born as a teenager and then how it evolved in ways that she would never have expected. Although when she looks back, she's not that surprised. We talked about things like how to know when it's time to leave a job versus when to stay and make it work. We talk about what it really means to be in a toxic environment and also about how we can experiment with various roles and skill development while keeping a current job. So much here. We also talk about feedback, and Kathy shares actually several personal anecdotes that really add color to our conversation today. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hi, Kathy. So good to have you on today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So you and I met, I think, about 8 years ago when I joined the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals, NAPO, and you have this as one of your hats, Clever Girl Organizing. So that will probably come up in conversation here and there. But really, what we'll be talking probably more about is the other hats you wear as it relates to career coaching and the ways that you help folks navigate their careers. So I'm just going to say a few more things about you and then let you speak too. You help people in a discovery path. You help them market themselves. You work with various tools that they might need to work on in order to navigate the way they want to through their careers after you've maybe helped them get some clarity around that, and helping them with storytelling and resume writing and all of the things, helping you transition, helping individuals transition into new roles. And what I found too is that you come with so much wisdom and history because prior to this, you have 20 years of experience in corporate HR roles. I will say I feel like I immediately vibed with you. I noticed that in any conversation that you had very reflective qualities. You're very grounded and engaged and really able to see large themes and speak to these insights really skillfully. So I am thrilled to have you on today, especially because all of this comes with this lens of the HR professional, but now you maybe are a little removed from that, maybe have some more freedom to talk about things. So again, really jazzed to have you on and welcome. And is there anything that you would say to any of the things that I just said in your introduction?
That's all spot on. That's how we met. I'm thrilled that we've actually been able to evolve our own conversations over the years beyond the organizing and productivity space. And I do think that the idea of spending 20 years in HR, but then it's been over 9 since I left HR, really having two very different lenses in the world that I think that you're speaking about in your podcast and your audience. And I'm excited to bring both to this conversation.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to say at the outset, and this is kind of just, a premise and underlying message that I am seeking to talk about things that are sometimes sticky or uncomfortable inside of corporate, but in life more generally too. But the purpose about talking about these things is that I really do think that we can make it better with more awareness and a lot of things don't get discussed. So this is a space for that discussion. And I'm not necessarily coming at this with a prescriptive lens. I think that I'm hoping that folks get additional awareness and understanding, and just open up a little bit more personally. So not so much prescriptive as it is building awareness and just being open to discovery and new ideas. And I love too that you have this kind of fluidity of career that you're bringing into it, because I think it helps people to understand how people transition, how transitions are made, that it's not always clear when you're looking forward. Maybe the rearview mirror looks more clear than going forward. So I'd like to begin by understanding more about the history here and what characterized various transitions in the corporate side, and then also as you transitioned into entrepreneur. And I know now we're covering like 30 years of history, but whatever those inflection points are, and then so you personally, but then what would you say also, more generally and broadly about transition?
That's great. And I'll do my best to make 30 years concise and cogent, but I think I'm lucky in that I do have a lot of hindsight and clarity around not only where have I been and where were those inflection points, but I also think that in a lot of ways, even though where I am today in my early 50s is not necessarily where I thought I'd be, it's not actually too surprising. So I'm one of those lucky people who knew as a teenager, number one, I loved psychology. And number two, I also thought I'd work in business setting. And I learned about industrial psychology. And back then it was personnel, not human resources. And it just clicked for me. So I had a plan, even for my teen years, that I was really enjoyed the notion of understanding what makes people tick, what's motivating people for behavior, and understanding that the business world needed that, used that, and could leverage it. It just absolutely felt like a fit for me from a very early age. So I was able to go to college, study, get my MBA, and really had a plan about I was going to go into HR. And I started my first few years in that career, actually my first half of my career, in compensation, which was an accident, right? It was not my plan to get into compensation. Somebody quit in the middle of the night in my company. I was working at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones. Somebody quit overnight in the middle of survey season. Surveys are how people fill out information about how much people get paid, and it's like the Bible inside the corporate world.
Yeah.
If you've ever challenged anybody to say, gee, I'm looking for a raise, or I'm not sure I'm being paid to market, this is the engine around that. And so my boss at the time said, hey, we need help on this, we think you can do it, would you pitch in? And that really started 10 years in compensation, because what I understood really quickly was compensation wasn't about math and numbers, it was about power and messaging. And I saw at this young age in my corporate career, my early 20s, mid 20s, that this was so critical to how careers were made, strategies were enhanced and developed, so many different things inside this one tiny lens. And I was at this unique spot. It's the mid 90s. I knew how to use Excel and nobody else did in my department. So I got to go on all these important projects that I was working with the CEO of my company, because I was the only one in HR who knew how to use Excel. So I could work on these things that just had such insight and power. And while I loved that aspect of compensation and understanding that's how corporations were really driven, I also knew what it meant for me personally. It started to bring out and tap into a negative spot for me, which was I felt like I had to be in the business of saying no. Right? It's human resources covers a lot of different areas and expertise, and compensation is one that lots of people shy away from. They think you need to have a real expertise and knowledge about it. And I'm not saying you don't, but it tends to be the scariest one that most people dive into. But we are always seem to be in the business of saying no. Can I have this? Can I do this? Can we move this? Can we change this? And it felt like I was like the gatekeeper, trying to protect against breaches of integrity of the systems that held the company together. And what I understood was I was very good at that, but it didn't bring out the best in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a really important lesson from a colleague. I moved on from the Journal and Dow Jones. I moved up to Boston. I was working at Wang for a little bit, and then I got into the biotech industry, which, as you probably know, in Boston and Cambridge area, this is
Mm-hmm.
huge. And this is the late 90s and the biotech boom. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, everybody's really competitive, looking to bring in new talent. And gosh, they can go down the street and get $1 billion. We have to match that. So I had an HR partner who I worked with who came to me and one day gave me some of the most valuable advice I've ever received in my life. And she said, Kathy, we have to come to you so that we can do what we need to do. And you absolutely give us the information we need. But boy, do you make us feel awful for having to come to you and ask.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And and this is 20 years ago and I still get chills from just the tremendous gift that this person who clearly cared about me and my success and her own sanity to bring that to me, right? Because what I understood was it didn't matter if I was amazing at the what,
Mm-hmm.
it was the how that was getting in my way.
Yeah. So I hope that you can remember where you are in this because I have to ask you right now, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
while we're in it, like
Yeah.
how much time did it take you to digest that? Like, can you explain like,
Yeah.
were you immediately like horrified? Were you, like the feelings around that and how long it took for you to really understand this as a gift?
Yeah. So first of all, we both broke down crying instantly,
Wow.
right? Like that's how instant it it erupted in me, and how genuine it was from her, and how much I understood how important it was for her to take this very scary step. I mean, she's coming to this person who she's already saying has a how problem, and she's sharing that language like, oh, how's the how problem going to show up when you're getting negative feedback?
Yeah.
And, but I think what it did was it opened up for me this clarity I have now, right? Which is what I talked about of saying, I really felt that the most important thing I needed to do, excellence in my job, was saying no,
Uh-huh.
right? And so it instantly invited for me the freedom to say, oh, maybe I don't need to do this kind of a job. Like it's really it's and it was what started for me to then leave the compensation world, because I understood I was at this brink where I felt like I had no other option but to have my how show up in that way, right?
Mhm.
I thought this was my only method of success.
And you said she was a partner. Was she like a direct colleague? Was she a boss? Like what,
Yeah, she was. So she's an HR partner. So she was servicing
a
clients
different,
inside the company.
yeah.
So a colleague.
Yes. Okay.
She was certainly older than I was. I was a
Okay.
bit young in my career. I've been throughout my 20 years in HR. I always seem to be a bit younger than everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, I'm sure maturity was a factor at lots of different points.
Mm-hmm.
But it was this moment where I took it in and knew I needed to change. I wasn't going to be able to change me, but
Mm-hmm.
I could change my what
Okay.
and see if a different me came out.
And this is totally side point. Do you think there are people in compensation or in this type of role who are easier to approach, or is it just the nature of the work?
There are definitely people. So I think in some ways it is the nature of the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compensation, for the most part, is about effectively applying the resources of the company in order to advance its goals,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether that's around a new hire salary or a stock option program or designing sales comp. It's around saying that we understand that this is a leverage point that on a macro or micro level helps us advance
Mm-hmm.
our agenda, but also it has to do so within a budget. And we know that there's so much of a focus on things like equity, internal equity, external
Mm-hmm.
equity, that
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be a lot at risk,
Mm-hmm.
not just outside of exceeding the budget, but there's a lot at risk of getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at its core, there's a lot there that is from a it's not a yes and kind
Mm-hmm.
of organization within human resources. That said, I think that I have many, many outstanding compensation colleagues that I've met throughout the years that have been great at understanding how to partner, how to
Mm-hmm.
collaborate, how to
Mm-hmm.
compromise,
Mm-hmm.
creativity deployed, uh, and understanding that it absolutely can be a tool for success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's great. So I definitely don't want to have an anti-comp hat. And I went
Yeah, yeah.
on, so I ended up shifting at that time out of compensation for several years while still at Millennium, and having some great opportunities in staffing and mergers and acquisitions and lots of great stuff. But then I ended up leaving Millennium in a layoff
Mm-hmm.
and starting over. Gosh, the best thing on my resume was my compensation experience. So I kind of had to get back into it.
Mm.
The next 10 years of my HR career was at Fidelity Investments in a couple of very different parts of Fidelity than most people would know. Most people just know it as the financial services
Mm-hmm.
industry, but most of my time was actually in the private investment and venture capital side.
Mm.
But I started in compensation again, and there was a bit of going back to that old how in there, and where I was faced with this next kind of moment to say, nope, this is really not right with me, is I was working with salespeople, right?
Mm.
When I was in biotech, or I was in printing and publishing, I wasn't dealing with world-class salespeople. And
Mm-hmm.
what's the problem with world-class salespeople for me? They want to negotiate my yes and my no. I remember there was a um I remember very well a person who he was a branch manager on the phone. He said, "Kathy, I'm not letting you off the phone until I get the answer I need." And I remember saying to him, I said, "You seem to be under the impression that I can't hang up." Right. And I was like, I don't know who you think you're dealing with here, but I'm not someone to be negotiated with. There was a woman who was at a very senior level who was absolutely trying to emotionally appeal and emotionally manipulate my answers. And I understood they were all using sales
Yeah,
tactics to
right.
try and influence me. And I was like, this is not, I'm getting paid really well, but I'm miserable and it's combative every day.
Mm. Mm.
I was trying to push away these sales tactics every day because
Mm-hmm.
my job was to protect the breach, right? And
Yeah.
so it was enough for me to say, I'm so glad I got into a great company that encouraged me to look at other opportunities, because that's when I was able to split out of there, move over into the private investment arm at Fidelity. It started as Fidelity Capital and then turned into Devonshire Investors. And there I became an HR partner. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember the woman who had recruited me, she was the head of HR at the time. She said, Kathy, what I love about you is you are extremely sensible. You see the big picture long before everybody else does. You synthesize information, and you're not afraid of really scary compensation. And boy, do we have scary compensation plans over here. So
Mm.
she knew that the big barrier that other people would have to coming over to this organization was nothing for me. So she gave me this big chance to become an HR partner, become an internal consultant and coach, which I'm immensely grateful for, because I don't know that without someone who had experienced my best in my best moments and understood the rest of it, I'm not sure I would have gotten the opportunity to make that
Mm.
leap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and this gonna bring me to another point that I have. I don't know that I want to go there now. I might come back to it because you and I talked in an initial call about, empowerment at the workplace. This is linked a
Yeah,
little bit to my question
yeah,
around that. At this point, you are at Fidelity, and then
yeah,
at some
yeah,
point, you end up on your own from Fidelity,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I spent 7 years in this part of the organization doing just some of the most creative work you could ever imagine in human resources. And I was really just, I wouldn't trade 5 years of it for anything. A couple of those years I might trade.
Okay.
But as we started coming out, I was approaching 40 and realizing that I had always known what I wanted my career to be like when I was 40, but I really didn't have a plan for 41, right? I never had that kind of
That's-
vision.
okay.
And like I said, I knew at a young age what I thought things were going to be, but then I was like, oh my gosh, what is next? And we were going through some significant shifts inside our organization and changing the investment model, which meant that my role could be eliminated through a layoff. I was actually managing the layoff.
Mm.
And so I was able to have the conversation with my boss and said, I think it's time for me to go. So I was able to have many months notice of my own layoff because I was doing this project management. And I started thinking about what was next. And honestly, I was a bit burnt out. It was 20
Mm-hmm.
years of HR. I didn't see a 21st year in me at the time. It felt like in order to be in HR, I felt I needed to be emotionally available to
Oh.
give it my all. And
Mm-hmm.
I was not in that position to do that with a new company at that time.
Mm.
But in the meanwhile, in the back of my mind was always this idea of organizing and productivity. I'm one of those people who found Peter Walsh on Clean
Oh,
Sweep
yep.
in 2003, and I was like,
Yep.
oh my gosh, this is a thing I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And I had lots of other little moments along the way where I loved being able to work as an HR leader with my VPs and their teams around productivity, goal setting,
Mm-hmm.
performance improvement, all of the stuff. And I realized, oh, this is the microcosm inside HR that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of tested it out with my husband and my boss and my friends and family and said, what do you think if I were to go in this direction? And to a fault with every single one, they said, oh my gosh, you have to do this, you have to give it a try.
Hmm.
So I was able to walk away from a 20-year career in human resources feeling like really proud of what I had done, but also ready to say, and it's okay for that to be my past
Mm-hmm.
and to start over, so it's something new.
Mm.
And so I started with the productivity and organizing side with Clever Girl Organizing. But then I also started with the career coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another stumbling event. Somebody was a resume writer and she needed me to take over her company while she traveled around the world. I did that for a bit. I worked at an outplacement firm doing counseling for people who had just been laid off and worked there for a couple of years.
Mm.
And it was a great way to learn what I liked and didn't like about career coaching so that
Mm-hmm.
honestly, once my organizing and productivity business got so busy that I needed to walk away from those other opportunities, I could recast my private practice on my own terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What you just said is the rings something true for me, is this ability to practice and see what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
And I think that you can do that no matter where you are in your career. You can always be, taking a look at, okay, what are the aspects of this very role that I'm good at? What do I like? What do I not like? And just constantly be evaluating that, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be evolution and thinking about what you'd prefer not to be doing.
And I knew, and I knew at that time, what was the worst that's going to happen? I take a year to go try something new.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work out, and I have to go get another job with a
Yeah.
20-year career underneath me. It was a no risk scenario in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways for me to try something new, right? Was there financial risk? Sure. There are other
Mm-hmm.
things in play,
Yeah.
but I knew I was going to be able to have a do-over if I needed to.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew I wasn't getting any younger. I was 41, and if not now, when?
Mm-hmm.
And being able to go into it with pure curiosity and wonder
Mm-hmm.
just allowed me to say, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm excited about the
Mm-hmm.
idea of tapping into this idea that's been in my brain for years.
Yeah.
This the where I know my happy place is, where I know
Yeah.
I've done my best work and made
Mm-hmm.
my greatest impact on others is
Mm-hmm.
when I've been able to play in this space.
Yeah. That is so huge. I worry. I'm not sure it's true. I'm pretty sure it's true that is buried for some people.
Yeah.
That curiosity and wonder, which I do believe is potential that's in all of us as humans, and it gets squashed somewhere, whether it's in childhood or, maybe, someone isn't very good in school or just, various things that happen over one's lifetime, and being able to kind of find it if it's buried. But I do believe that it's possible to rekindle here and there. But for you,
Yeah.
it was kind of like there, always there.
It was there, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
lucky in that. I do, a lot of my work that I do with people in my career coaching space is often working with Gen X or older millennials who are, dipping their toe in the idea of doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they hear my story, they see not only am I a coach and a guide and all of that for this, but they say, "Oh my gosh, you did this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you know what it's like to say, oh gosh,
Hmm.
that paycheck and that 401k, that was great. What if that never comes back again?" Like
Right.
they know that I can relate and they can see and listen
Hmm.
and learn from me in my journey on that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fabulous. And I want to just make a statement out loud about just to anyone who could be listening around the fact that if it really is too financially risky, that doesn't mean not trying new things. That doesn't mean doing something as a side gig or, the moonlighting idea, I guess
Yeah.
is the word that was used before. I really want to encourage human beings to try and play and experiment or take online courses or just, anything to even, I understand that for many people, the giving up an income is absolutely not an option. So I
Yeah.
would hate for people to think that, well, that I can't do that. There's no way I could do that. I think experimentation and looking for that spark to be turned back on can be done inside of having a job, as I think I've been the example of that. But
Yes.
yeah.
And I do, a conversation I have with people often is, great, where are some volunteer opportunities that you can get
Yes.
involved in your community? Where's a board that you can join
Yes.
that allows
Yes.
you to tap into it? And the idea that our passions and the ways that we make an impact in life have to be tied to our 9 to 5 employer is
Right.
a really outdated model. And I
Absolutely.
think for a lot of people, I love helping them think creatively in terms of, all right, if you either want experience in this because
Hmm.
you're trying to grow, or
Yep.
you don't need to grow, you want to apply,
Hmm.
how do we work this into your life and bring in kind of a portfolio approach to
Yep.
your investment and your impact?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have to share that when I first got involved in or the ideas around entrepreneurship, it's because I was going to go into information brokering. So what I do right now for my day job is business and industry research inside a management consulting firm. And there's an association for independents for people who do this, as a fractional information broker or something, for a company that doesn't have the resources inside. And I started attending their annual meetings. And it was there that I had the ability to join committees and helped to put together the conference, and these opportunities tapped into my leadership skills that were there, but they weren't being drawn out in the day job. And
Yeah.
anyway, it ended up really helping me evolve in ways that I would not have expected. And it's interesting how your initial intention going into something it's not always the reason, it doesn't end up being the goal that comes out on the other side.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Okay. A little bit of a transition here. I shared in my first episode, which I believe you listened to, and I will help to tap in on your memory of this. But I shared an experience that I had in my late 20s at my first management consulting job, where my boss said some offensive things after I found research that she wasn't able to find. I don't know if this is ringing any bells for you.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. And I described too how I was financially I was just in a very vulnerable place, not knowing what the hell I was doing. And then in talking to you and learning that you have had this kind of empoweredness of to you, almost to a fault sometimes, I think you described. I'm wondering if you could even see yourself in a similar situation. Like, had anything like that ever come close to happening in your own work life? And or if you put yourself in my shoes, do you think your reaction that you would have been able to say something in the moment, or if you would have, decided to find a new job within 4 weeks, or like, did you have any like instinctual responses to that?
I so if I remember the conversation correctly, and if you,
Yep.
I don't need to recap, but the idea was that you were on the phone
Yeah.
with a consultant or an
Yep.
external consultant or a client, and you had information, but your boss had come in and said, "Nope, sorry, we don't have that information," and
Right.
you're like, I just kind of gave him the information, and your
Right.
boss really came coming down on you,
Mm-hmm.
and also in front of a witness.
Well, I will say that there was no witness there. I
Oh,
don't
okay.
think
Oh,
there could have been
okay.
people that could hear in other rooms, but anyway, that's a side point.
Yeah. So I'm lucky in that I had really great relationships with almost all of my managers along the way. That said, I definitely had difficult conversations and difficult relationships with internal clients within my HR career,
Mm.
where I probably was feeling like they didn't consider me to be their favorite. They didn't think they were getting the A player on the team by having
Oh.
me because I was probably younger than they were used to working with, right? I was working
Mhm.
with C-level and executive vice president people, and I'm in my 30s and a woman, and
Mhm.
how good could I possibly be?
Right.
And so there are a few moments that come to mind for sure of very difficult conversations where my client was unhappy with the level of support that
Mhm.
he was getting from me because I wasn't telling him yes, right? Back
Mhm.
gets back into my
Right.
the what and the how of my job. And I was able, there were times where I was absolutely able to stand up and say, this is where I'm at and this is where I'm coming from. And there were times where I just kind of took it and said, I know this guy's a jerk, and there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to influence this moment or his opinion of me in any way.
Mhm.
I'm going to kind of go back and focus on the people I like working with and like working for and like
Mm.
supporting.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so even though I didn't have a lot of that from managers, and I'm really lucky in that way,
Mhm.
I was not without conflict for sure in my journey.
Mhm. Yes. You had also said just around the empowerment versus not empowerment and suggesting that it might be not the best to be too empowered, especially when you're too young. It could come off as
Yeah,
being entitled. And then this also kind of links to the whole conversation around Gen Xers not being so thrilled with the way millennials behave and the entitled
yeah,
type of behavior, which I will say I've gotten less stuck to those types of categories. I think they're helpful to describe things, the archetypes, but I think that they exist in every generation. Like within generations, you have entitled people and disempowered people, and on and on. And just speaking to is there a sweet spot? Like, what is there a place that we should expect to be in this way? It's so complicated and human.
it is complicated. I remember an early lesson I had in my maybe I'm a little too empowered journey. I was probably 26 or so. I was working at the Journal and at Dow Jones, and gosh, somebody must have left the company, and there was an open office in the HR department, and I'd
Mhm.
been in a cube,
Mhm.
and I did not get the office. I was pissed. And I made it clear to my boss
Mhm.
that I thought I had been done wrong right? By
Mhm.
not getting this office. And
Mhm.
he was great. And he said, I don't know why you think
Mhm.
you're entitled to the office.
Mhm.
And I remember that sense of entitled versus deserved as being different, right?
Mm.
Did I deserve it, or did I just feel like I was owed it?
Mhm.
And he's
Mm.
like, your work doesn't require it. That person's does. He's been here long,
Mhm.
like all the different ways. I'm like, I
Yeah.
know you want it, and I know you think you should have been rewarded with it, but
Mhm.
that's not what this is. And it was a way for him to help me separate the difference between don't focus on what everybody else is doing, focus on you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important. And this links a little bit to like beliefs that we have about how things should be or shouldn't be. And it sounds like he was able to come to you with like kind of neutral, just kind of like factual questions or things to think
Yeah,
about as it relates to that, which is beautiful, right? And sometimes from either end, the discussion or the conversation, the tone could come across as very defensive. And I had an example of that in another podcast I did where a managing director had been asked by a brand new consulting staff person for a different type of soda in the collection of sodas that were available in the kitchen. And the reaction from this probably boomer MD was, I mean, it was a strong reaction. It was like, how
mm,
dare you ask that? I mean, it was like the associate had violated a rule. And I kind of question it. It's like, I don't think we should not ask questions. It's one thing to think that something is owed, and I'm not sure if he came across with you know, a, a mentality around that. And a soda is much different from an office, but there does seem to be like ideas around rules that we have. that we come in with.
You know what I remember listening to that story about the soda, and one of the things that can be an experience and a dynamic that goes on, and this isn't just in an office, this is in
Yeah,
every aspect of life, is the person asking the question has no idea what
absolutely.
they've stumbled into that's underneath all of that, right? They might not know that they spent 6 months negotiating the contract with the vendor for the
Absolutely.
sodas, or how much they had to make decisions about X, Y, and Z, and what now you come to me with a soda, or gee, we asked people in the past, whatever it is. And I think in HR, it was always really easy for me to to bear that. I'm like, do you know? People come asking questions with a tone that just assumes that we're
Mm-hmm.
incompetent
Mm,
or intentionally trying to malign others. I'm like, do you know how much went into us getting us here? We don't
right.
always know the answers, or we've done so much work here. So sometimes the asking of a simple question, people don't know what they're about to stumble into is someone
Mm-hmm.
else's history or
Yeah,
someone else's collective understanding about how they got to that same point.
right. And to the person who stumbles into something and has no idea what just happened, what would you say to him or her?
I think if something has been unleashed against them for what clearly looks like they just stumbled into something, it it something where it's this is clearly not about you. This is
Right,
clearly about something else,
right,
right? It can be hard in that moment, and there isn't to
right.
say there isn't going to be damage control down the line, but how you control your reaction to it. If you find yourself
Yeah,
doubling down and saying, all right, well, now I'm championing root beer, right? Like I'm going to be the patron saint of root beer. If I do nothing else at this company, we're getting root beer here, right? Once you find that you're more invested in winning the fight
yeah,
rather than moving forward,
yeah,
it's hard to come back.
right, right. And I believe that this understanding of your own reactions and the fact that you could be creating a story around something that might not be accurate. that is exactly what one of the things that leads to burnout, in my opinion. I think that this, becoming over we talked about in the earlier conversation about, the energy behind the being defensive and the tension that can exist from things that are just unknown or unspoken or uncleared up, like the lack of clarity. I think is a huge component to burnout. And when we can focus on moving forward, the next step, it can be a very freeing experience. But yeah.
I, yeah, I agree. And I think the notion around the ambiguity, the
Mm-hmm.
energy that gets invested on both sides to wade through ambiguity is challenging, and sometimes it brings out the best in people, right? How many projects have you been involved with where it was just really unknown where it was going to go, but we all pulled together and we were all rowing the boat in the same direction, and oh my gosh, we hit the jackpot. We made
Mm-hmm.
happen what we never imagined possible otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ambiguity itself is not an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
What can be the problem is when you have very clear expectations, or you're frozen from forward motion without clarity. That's when I think some negative behavior and reactions
Mm-hmm.
can come about. When I
Mm-hmm.
when I would talk to folks about, people to say, "Gosh, I really need role clarity. I need clarity. I need clarity," and I would be comfortable asking and challenging, thinking, do you need clarity, or do you have clarity and just not like the answer?
Right.
And that can be a startling question for some people if they stop and think about it, saying, oh, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I do know what's going on here and I just don't like it.
Yeah.
And maybe I've just been so fixated or focused on creating an alternative situation
Mm-hmm.
that if I accept the fact that that's not coming,
Mm-hmm.
maybe now I can figure out how to be successful in this setting, or decide that this setting is no longer the right setting for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you described, thinking, having one's mind around the alternative scenario. And in my experience, when people are, they might be focused on just the opposite. Like, I don't want this anymore. I don't want that anymore. They're only focused, their alternative scenario is, I don't want what the current scenario is. And
Yeah.
I have told people, or I have found that it's helpful to know what the preferred scenario is so that you can understand, is it even possible in this role that I currently have? Or when and if it's time to move on. And that is like one of the questions I wanted to bring up with you is that, sometimes we need to kind of stay in a moment. Can't always flee from every situation, because then we're not dealing with life in reality. And I do believe that challenge, hardship, this is where the growing edge comes from, and where we learn and grow. So fleeing every uncomfortable job, I wouldn't say is advisable necessarily, but sometimes it is time to leave. And even, we talked also before about the idea of toxicity and toxic workplaces. And I don't know if you could, what are the type of criteria that you're looking for when you're advising a client to understand if it really is time to move on or just time to kind of regroup? And yeah, I don't know if that's enough of a question, but bringing this idea of toxic work environments is pretty popular too. So
It is popular. And I will have people who reach out to me to look into my services, right? But listen, by the time you're doing research on career coach or resume writer, you've already had it in your mind that a change needs to happen. And it either needs to be a big change or it needs to be a subtle enough one that makes an impact. But by the time you're looking for somebody like me, you've already started a lot of the thinking about change. And you've done it probably from a point of, this current situation is either untenable or I imagine that it's going to get there.
mm-hmm.
When I have people talk to me about it being a toxic work environment, I will spend a little time to try and understand more about that. Not in a way to try and get them to see that their situation is not quote unquote toxic, but I want to understand what some of the situational or environmental triggers have been to them which have gotten them there. Because if I can identify that what they're speaking about is just a function of work or just a function of being in a large company, a small company, whatever that is, to say, okay, I hear you. How would you go about finding a new opportunity that doesn't present those circumstances? Because sometimes I want to be able to say, I think there's an aspect to where you're at, or being in a dues paying role that your organization might deem it, or being at a point where you're not getting to work on the kinds of projects you want or getting the opportunities you want, that somebody can turn that and saying, okay, this is toxic. But I do think the word toxic has been overused and it gets a little diluted. And this isn't my Gen X, oh, back in my day, toxic really meant something kind of an answer, but it's just an empty word, right? I can't do something with the word toxic. Tell me more about what's behind it. So sometimes I will hear people say, well, I'm in a small company. There's 8 of us. It's owned by a husband and wife, and they're going through a divorce and they've taken it out on us. Okay, I'm in, right? Let's get you somewhere else. I do not need to know anything else about lunch hours there for me to know this is probably an environment that you shouldn't be in.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but what I want to say is, tell me what's underneath toxic for you, because I don't know that another job isn't going to present similar challenges.
Right.
And I would much rather help you figure out how to navigate through a job that doesn't feel like paradise, rather than you keep hopping and hopping and hopping and hoping and hoping and hoping.
Right. Right. That's fantastic. Those are some good questions to ask.
And I do think there are plenty of people who will come to me but their goal is, I want to make it work here. How do I expand my opportunities, my political cachet,
Right.
my network inside this company? Because I don't think I want to stay in this job, but my company is big enough that I could go do something else. I love those conversations, because that's somebody who's saying, I can see potential. I may even have access to potential. Help me strategize in a way that lets me move past what I feel right now is a dead end role. But my company doesn't seem to see it that is. But if I have somebody who comes to me and they say, I'm in a dead end role, I've applied for and been rejected for 9 other opportunities inside this company,
Mm.
that that's a clue for me to say you either have a sniper
Mm-hmm.
internally
Mm-hmm.
who thinks you have limited your pathway here,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least, there is something in your ability to tell your story effectively that is not coming across.
Mm.
Maybe it's showing up as desperation. You applied for 9 jobs. Here's what I know about you. You just want
Mm-hmm.
to get out and you don't care where,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I can help them
Mm-hmm.
identify through their own behavior
Right.
how they're showing up based
Mm-hmm.
on what I think my HR hat is telling me,
Mm-hmm.
and say, if you've applied for 9 jobs, you're not going to get the 10th one. It's
Mm-hmm.
time to think about a path outside of here if
Mm-hmm.
you want to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have this ability now, because you're not tied to an organization, to provide feedback that perhaps you weren't able to provide when you
Yeah,
were in that type of role. And so folks have blind spots, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
I wonder, are there any like common blind spots? Is there like ways of behavior that are just not helping people, that a lot of people seem to fall into?
I think there are, and it shows up in my dynamic with people as clients of mine, especially as we're doing interview preparation
Mm-hmm.
or the tell me about yourself story, and helping them figure out their story. I've given feedback to people for sure that says, I hear in your answers a tone that I think you're trying to demonstrate that you're qualified,
Mm-hmm.
but it's coming across in a way that demonstrates you're trying to show them you're the smartest person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You might be a great consultant to their problems, but I don't know that you're going to be a great collaborator for their problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And so feedback like I say, oh, number one is there another way I can be answering the question so that doesn't come
Right.
through? But number two is, wait a minute, what am I trying to be? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that actually a genuine response to the question? And this is how I feel, and this is the role I want to play inside a firm.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear, generalizing across the board, I'll hear different answers from some of my male clients than I will from some of my female clients
Mm-hmm.
around how they talk about their experience or their potential or their accomplishments, or how they're even telling their own personal stories. I think that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that I'll find people who are very strong relationship builders, which is
Mm-hmm.
great,
Mm-hmm.
but they lean on that and they don't actually show results, impact,
Mm-hmm.
work. They
Mm-hmm.
think, well, I'm a great relationship builder. That's how things are going to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And they can have a blind spot about the fact that it's not all just about who you know and who you can schmooze.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a variety
Mm-hmm.
of I don't want to say derailers, but there are blind spots out there that people have
Mm-hmm.
where they don't necessarily see that something that they're really proud of can also get in their way.
Yes. Yes. And there's so much in there. And I mean, I've had that same feedback, and it hasn't come that directly to me in terms of how I'm coming across. It's like not a lot of people are willing to tell you this. And I get it.
Yeah.
People that don't want to draw your your negative points. It doesn't seem like a very kind thing to do, but it has come out from time to time. But there was also this I'm also interested in, if you're the interviewer, how to acknowledge that there's something that's coming across internally, not out loud necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but be able to understand and see what the actual value is in this individual. Because I think sometimes we can be so overwhelmed by the tone or the whatever's coming across, well, it's kind of verbal because it kind of sounds different, right? um, if there are ways when you are either the interviewer or the boss, or the mentor, really being able to kind of separate a little bit from the tone to really hear what's underneath it.
I I think if you're an interviewer and this is a candidate in front of you, your flexibility around that is going to depend on how many other valuable candidates you have in the pipeline
Yeah.
and what was on paper on their resume or in their LinkedIn profile, or the person who referred them,
Mm-hmm.
that said, this person's compelling enough, we need to speak to them.
Mm-hmm.
And as an organization, organizations make sacrifices every single day in terms of talent, where they say,
Yeah.
we want this person and we're willing to accept X, Y, and Z because we know what we're getting out of them. I think this
Mm-hmm.
happens all the time. It feels like a space of tolerance, not embracing diversity, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
tolerance of diversity often.
Mm-hmm.
And them saying, well, we really prize and value what they're bringing. So we're willing to deal with the person who is failing in X. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're really lucky, it gets into an organization that says, welcome, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
work with you on X.
Mm-hmm.
X, X got in your way, we're willing to work with you on it. We hope you are interested in working on it with us,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because we think it could be part
Yeah.
of how you go far here.
Yep.
But not all companies and not all bosses and not all mentors are willing to do that.
Yeah, this brings up something that happened last week in a couple of conversations. A personal acquaintance of mine, early 60s, been working his entire career in engineering roles, and has a new boss, I think, from within the last 12 months. And he was telling me that he knows internally that at least 7 people who have left the company have left because of this
Yeah.
individual, and that people aren't saying that in their exit interviews because they don't want to burn bridges. And then in a separate conversation, someone who is an HR partner currently was saying, you'd be amazed at how the level of morale increases when you can actually remove one of these people.
Yeah.
What do you say to any of that?
Yeah, I've lived that life. And a big part of the negative side of being in HR is the notion that we are absolutely aware that 7 people have left because of this person. You don't need to say it in the exit. This is not a secret. But what we probably know is a couple of things. Number one, this person brings some value that is so critical, we'd rather live,
Mm-hmm.
or we're in a position where we have to live with the negative in order to retain the positive. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, there may be ongoing conversations with this person that nobody else has any
Sure.
visibility into.
Right.
And this person may have been getting coaching and feedback
Mm-hmm.
and even more heavy-handed performance conversations. But
Mm-hmm.
we have to, barring some sort of completely egregious grievance and action, there's
Mm-hmm.
usually a process that organizations have to take over
Right.
time.
Right.
And it's HR is often in the middle of understanding of that. And it's so often where this is an example, right? Where other people might say, oh my gosh, don't they know anything? Don't they realize this guy's a
Right.
problem?
Right.
Yeah, we totally realize. Guess what? He's a problem for me too. But this is where we're at. And we are trying to plug a hole in the ocean liner as best we can.
Okay, and that brings me to one other thing that I would I have a lot of like peripheral knowledge of, but I'd love to hear your knowledge around process and around what we're ultimately trying to protect the company from. I'm assuming it's lawsuits. What can you say to all of that?
Yeah, lawsuits are a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, most companies are going to be in a situation where they're going to have a risk management
Mm-hmm.
portfolio around litigious activities from employers. Uh, but it's not always that, right? So sometimes like I said, if there's something that this person is so unique in what they are, and they say we're willing to live with everything else, it might not be a lawsuit they're afraid of, but they're losing that unique talent. Or how
Mm-hmm.
long would it take for us to replace that? Or
Mm-hmm.
how far behind would we be if we lost this person today?
Mm-hmm.
That person could get hit by a bus today just as easily as anything else. So there's a vulnerability, there's
Mm-hmm.
succession planning, there's all sorts of things that go on inside an organization that
Mm-hmm.
make them vulnerable to not taking swift action.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly lawsuits are a real thing, and
Yeah.
I've been involved, and they're not great. And companies spend a lot of money on internal or external consultants around
Yes.
employment law all the time.
Yes. Yes. My sister, who is in HR for the last couple of years at a new company, it's a new thing that there is a legal person in the room at just
Yeah,
about every meeting.
yeah,
It's and I've heard, not necessarily related to organizations, it was a broader statement, just that the US tends to be the most litigious. And Fidelity is an international organization, is it? Or
Yes. Yeah.
so were there differences in other regions? Did you find, or do you know?
Well, I think there are legal differences in other regions, right?
Yeah,
So if
right.
I was working with a company that had offices in UK and Japan and Hong Kong and all sorts of things. So we would be trying to enact a policy or we were working on shifting and closing down a company. We had to do it very differently based on the region. So we
Yeah,
needed to understand the laws. So
yeah,
it wasn't so much was one country going to be more litigious. It was just one country was going to have different laws we needed to
yeah,
follow and comply.
yeah,
And so,
yep.
and but I think if I were to have a conversation with a manager around a performance problem, and they say we need to put them on a PIP, a performance
Mm-hmm,
improvement plan. I said, great. Do you genuinely think they can improve?
mm-hmm,
Right?
mm-hmm,
Because a performance improvement plan needs to be rooted in the idea that potential is achievable.
mm-hmm,
Because if you don't, then every single conversation you're going to have with that employee are going to be peppered with that sense of hopelessness,
mm,
and that employee
mm,
is going to know this is only we're just watching the clock and it's a matter of
yeah,
time,
mm,
and they're just checking legal boxes.
yeah,
But if you're a manager, say, do you think this person can improve? Great. Then you need to have a very different tone in your conversations with them. Yes, we're
mm-hmm,
going to document. Yes,
mm-hmm,
we're going to make them clear that there's consequences on the line here, but working with them and for their success is a very different approach than, well, they said I needed to document 3 times. Here's your third letter, right?
right. And each for either view of the PIP, whether it's yes, we really do see potential, or this is hopeless cause. I mean, and that's not great language I'm using around that. Either way, process has to happen, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. I
yeah.
was working with someone who was in a performance improvement situation and it genuinely didn't know how bad it was. And
Mm-hmm.
the person shared with me the emails from their boss and some letters, and I said, "Okay, you're about to get fired.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt in my mind reading this. I
Mm-hmm.
can help you figure out how to navigate what's next in terms of your conversations with your manager to get
Mm-hmm.
a softer landing here. But I
Mm-hmm.
can tell from this process that they've been taking and the language in these letters,
Mm-hmm.
they have already decided you are not going to improve to their satisfaction."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a tough one. This is, where does, I don't know. There's no answer. If someone's not
No,
working with someone like you, it's like
yeah.
they just experience it and then they chalk it up and maybe they know better next time. What?
And I have so many clients who will come to me and they'll say, I don't think this is going to work out. Things aren't going well here. I can't quite decide yet if I'm ready to quit without a new job or should I just wait to get fired. And this is it's an amazing conversation for me to have with somebody, and I have it with them often, right? I have them
Like the
with
same person
clients
again
on
and again, or
no, no, no,
okay,
no,
okay, just
no,
many
often,
call.
like
Yep.
often clients. This is not a unique situation where people will say, I'm in a bad situation. I haven't decided yet if I can leave without a job or do I just stay here, be miserable, feel punished, and clearly just wait to get fired
Mm,
because,
mm,
and I don't know that 10 years ago this was as common a reality people faced. And so maybe this is a function of pandemic, maybe these are my more often my millennial clients or clients
mm-hmm,
maybe in their early 30s and late
mm-hmm,
20s. I don't work a ton with the younger millennials, but when I do, this is coming up more often. And maybe these are also overlapped with those people who say the environment's toxic,
yeah,
or there's an overlap with
right,
some of these other conditions where they just
right,
say, maybe I should just wait to get fired. And it's
right.
amazing to me that somebody would just put that on the
Yeah,
table as a
yeah.
fully viable option of how to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it goes to what I had said in a previous episode around language and getting clearer on that. Like, and you helping people to get clarity around what, okay, what does it really happen? Toxic is this blanket term. Let's get clear so we can decide what action to take. And even for these young millennials, to just kind of sit. This is like the waiting. Is it a duck that waits? That you are investigating other things the things we're talking about before, whether you're volunteering or taking a course or, or apprenticing or doing some kind of side hustle or moonlighting. Maybe there are so many entrepreneurs or, business owners who need part-time help. There are so many ways, I think, to dip your toes into other things to see what does resonate, while this job likely isn't a fit. I'm probably not going to be there in 6 months, whether it's my doing or their doing. And how am I going to prepare myself right now instead of sitting, in, in this miserable
Yeah,
condition?
right. You're absolutely right. The sitting and the waiting,
Mm-hmm.
these are not the only two options, right? Go find new job
Mm-hmm.
that's perfect and pays
Right.
you,
Right.
or stay here and get fired. Like there's there's not a world in which I got fired is the better answer that I can think of. There just isn't.
I there is a world where people think in terms of unemployment versus non-employment paying, payments, and
Absolutely.
that's a thing.
Right.
So it has to
Yeah.
be acknowledged. And
Yeah.
um, anywho,
Yeah, I'm wearing the what's the story I'm telling hat,
yes.
right? So when you go and they say, so tell me why you're not working right now,
Mm-hmm.
or tell me why you're looking for a new job, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've been there. I've taken my unemployment pay. I know
Sure.
how
Yeah.
important that
Absolutely.
is.
Yes.
Um, but it's
Yes.
you're still, somebody's going to do an employment check on you, and they're going to do credit check, and they're going to say, oh, we called your last employer, and they let us know that uh, you were ineligible for rehire, or you
Mm-hmm.
had left, it was an involuntary
Mm-hmm.
termination, right? They're not
Mm-hmm.
going to give you the details,
Right.
but I'll tell you what, they might not give you the details, but all you need to do is know two people who work at that company through LinkedIn. You make
Mm.
some phone calls. Hey, what do you know about Joe?
Mm.
Oh, Joe, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if your company formally or informally doesn't give references. People know people.
Yeah. And people can find people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to shift into my final question set, or any aspect of this that you would like to answer, I think would be fabulous. And I'm asking people about, what it is to be satisfied in their work. So you personally, and then if you think there are broad strokes for people in general. And I also like to ask, what does it mean to be valued at work? And what to you? I mean, I feel like this is such a personal thing. So two questions there around being of value, and then also satisfaction in work.
I can answer the question about being of value so differently, since I'm in my own world where I get to define my own value when you're an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
I really get to define what what felt like a good day. Where did I make an impact? Am I working with the right people to make the right kind of change I believe in happen in their life? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's easy now. But even when I was in HR or I was in the corporate world, the idea of being valued was when somebody asked a question and I answered it, did it did it move the needle in where the company was going?
Mm.
But then I moved into a different phase, which was, am I in a situation where I get to ask the questions?
Mm.
This was a big change for me in my HR career when I went from being the question answerer to the question asker.
Mm.
And I knew that that was where my better value in the organization was.
Mm. Wow. That is that's awesome. I mean, I probably will be noodling on that for a while. I mean, yeah, all aspects of that. And I do, to what you said initially about what you do now, and that you can really understand what a good day is and the impact, and that you've helped people make the right change. I have the belief that we can decide who we're going to be inside of the day work too. Um, and it can feel incongruent if you don't really believe in the needle of the organization, right? If you don't really
Yeah.
believe in what the company is about, that can be problematic. But I still think that who you are as a human can matter to the other humans you're working with, no matter what the company does at the end of
Yeah,
the
I
day.
think that idea of fit is so important,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes up in ways that are just not always obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't know that it's not a fit until we're really getting blisters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not getting friction, it may be a better fit than you ever really stopped to appreciate.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Ah, so fabulous. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much. I want people to know how to get in touch with you.
Thank you. I can be found at kathyvines.com. That's Kathy with a K and Vines, V as in Victor,
Mhm.
Ines. And I do work with people who are looking for something new, who are looking for better success and pathways inside what they're doing now.
Mhm.
People who are thinking 5 years from now, I might want to shift. So I want to start doing the work now to get me well positioned. I
Mhm.
love helping people get clear
Mhm.
on what they want to do, what they're good at, and how they can move forward.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, whether that's with resume writing or career coaching or LinkedIn strategy, I I want to help people move forward, especially when what's getting in their way is themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Thank you. Thank you again. And to anyone who would consider working with Kathy, you are engaged and you're with people. I mean, I've definitely like felt that from you, that you are definitely not distracted. I find sometimes when I work one-on-one with people, I'm not really sure they're fully like in my head and space, but I've always felt that from you. And then when you were describing what you do, for example, with a resume, right, it just it said that even more to me, that this is you do a ton of work on the back end to prepare and really do the best by your clients. So we need more of you in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
those kind words. I appreciate them.
Yep. You're welcome. So thanks again, and we'll talk soon. Bye bye. There you have it. Episode 6 is in the books. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, or maybe there's something that you wish that I'd asked Kathy or you wish that I would get from other guests, please send them my way. I'd also love to know stories from the corporate front lines. What's happening in your unique workplace experience? Again, send them my way. You can record stories to an app on your phone and then send them to me via email at linda@workdopepod.com. Or, of course, any of the questions or comments can be sent there as well. Linda@workdopepod.com. That's WORKDOPEPOD.com. Until next time, this is Linda Stacy signing off for Work Dope. Bye bye.